skin a moose, but Vance Hall taught me there's one way to skin a cat. What I want to do is try to tread between kind of reminding you of some things, reminding me of some things, but also thinking about some context and perspective. Why did we come? Why did we were there? You know, and you always have to say, I mean, these are things, I mean, I remember I was going through the process of writing the obituary of my best friend, Montrose Wolf. And the response from that was, wait a minute, you're giving him too much, I mean, not you're giving him too much credit, but there aren't great men, there are just, you know, everybody gets together and we all work together cooperatively and good things happen, but that's not true. There are great men. And one of the greatest is Richard Schiefelbusch, who has vision. Now, we all had our agendas. We all had the things and the reasons for doing what we wanted to do. We had, at the University of Washington, Montrose got us all thinking and going, and the brilliance of you can actually work in the setting with the people, making interventions and do benefit to them rather than just use them as subjects. That notion of field research, of being there, of learning and participating was brand new, and it came in with Montrose Wolf walking through the door at the Institute of Child Development saying, getting assigned to work with the preschool teachers to teach them the principles of behavior. And that's where the massive discoveries of things that we now just say, of course we always know that, haven't we? And the answer is no, we haven't always known that. We have not known the power of adult attention for young children until he began working with Betty Hart and Eileen Allen and Florence Harris and Margaret Johnston, and I'm skipping a few because I'm old, and so you can't remember everything. But the notion of actually saying what's going on and what happens and change the dynamics and the interaction in the setting, and the power of that, how big and fast and large the changes. Remember, all of us were trained on analogs. You worked with rats or pigeons or little kids in simulated settings and extrapolated hypothetically about how you might explain the world, but none of us are ever trained to go look at the world. So you were hypothetically explaining a virtual reality that you constructed also. In other words, but the notion of getting in there and getting your nose rubbed into the reality and interacting with reality is something, and the notion you could do that with science. With science, it wasn't just you were a good person and you had to either choose between science and doing good. The notion that you could do good and take data, that you could actually do good and in the process learn how to do good and capture what you would. Where that came from, I learned recently was the notion from Francis Bacon that Mont introduced me to on the Experimenting Society. It was, of course, picked up by B.F. Skinner in Walden 2 and Science and Human Behavior. And it isn't behaviorism, it's the notion of the Experimenting Society that we can learn from what we do by systematically looking, by getting involved with the world, by paying attention to it, by not documenting and learning from it, so that what we do next is more wise and informed and things move on. That we as a society can do that, that everybody can do that in the process of what they're doing. That's what we brought. That's what Mont brought to us. And that's what we brought here. It was that notion that it's an opportunity. We wanted to get together. All of us wanted. And we can kind of say we'd like to work together, but we all wanted to work with Mont. You know, so it was so much fun. We wouldn't want to let the opportunity to pass. And you know, Mont was ensconced at University of Arizona. It's a nice place, and I had a job offer from Columbia, and we're at the same salary, but I would have been poor in New York City and okay here. But anyway, but the real reason it was, you know, I'll come if you'll come. That was what we all kind of did together. But we did it because there was somebody who had a vision and provided the context for us to do it. We were playing in Dick Schiefelbusch's vision. We had our agendas, we had our excitement, but we didn't have a vision and somebody managing the context. And now, those of you who are behavioral understand that that's where all the action is. It's managing the context. And that people play out what they do and that reinforces motivation in the context and in the arrangement somebody else makes. Now, this was Dick's arrangement. You know, the notion of saying, can a university do this? Can a university come to a community? Okay? And the notion that retardation, the concept of retardation, could be expanded to include the environmentally produced retardation of poverty and disadvantage and the outcomes. That could be, so taking a program project grant and expanding it into the notion of the kind of disadvantage, the retarded functioning in terms of people and so on who grow up in the context of disadvantage, was the genius of it. Now, and the genius of putting together pieces of things. Turner House, the Episcopal Church, had a basement, okay? They were a little ashamed of, you know, it was an old church and it had been disassembled and there was a basement that they used for a youth thing and they were it was kind of shameful and they were a little ashamed. A bright man, Harris Collingwood. Bright people in the community who wanted to do something. And the notion of being able to assemble all this, but realizing that every one of them strengthened everyone else's hand. That whatever cachet the university had, the NAG group, it strengthened their hand to be collaborating with the university. Okay, the university with us, the NAG group and the Episcopal Church made it legitimate for some of the Board of Regents kind of people to say, well, I guess it's okay, these aren't just crazy people. You know, so like the notion of putting this together and assembling it is the brilliance and genius of Dick Schiefelbusch. Now, he's not just a guy who can do that and does it. Does it because he's not only got a vision, but he kind of knows how to deal with people. And the other thing, he's a Kansan. It was like, it's amazing. He was a Kansan. He said, well, in Kansas, we just go talk to them. And we try to get into trouble, as usual. And he would take me, and we'd go and talk to the people. And then some of them, they'd agree, and we would, and it is that notion of saying, there's trust you build into the system. There's credibility, not just by bunches of people getting together, but by using different halos and different things to put together to something like this. So the creation of a place, a program, and putting it together and getting everybody agreed is a long-term kind of a courtship of many people of putting that together. And that's the other part that Dick gave us, was that program project grants, which are making those marriages between other people who are researchers and so on, and so you get a credible product to put together. And so better than, we were smarter in, you know, he was, committees aren't smarter than individuals, it's quite the opposite. But when you have a leader who's orchestrating and collaborating things, the outcome is smarter than any one of the people could do. And so, you know, we sort of, there are many people around the world, in the country, who have benefited from Dick, his brilliance and wisdom. And I'll just give you one story. Paul Brooks Publishing. Okay, Paul Brooks Publishing, you know, they published Betty and my work, Meaningful Differences. They're a publisher of issues about disability and young children. And they branched to other things that are related to that. And, you know, a new author. And so Paul Brooks had me over to dinner to his house, and he told me the story of how he started Paul Brooks Publishing. He had been at University Park Press, and Dick had talked to him about the need for having a publisher that really began to groom materials and promote materials for young children and for people with disabilities, and excited him so much. So he gives credit to Dick for prompting him to take the step to set up a publishing company called Brooks Publishing, which is a marvel. It plays that role so well in the publishing in the world. So, but then person after person after person, Mike Cataldo talks about he's doing Dick Schiefelbusch at Johns Hopkins. I mean, the notion of people doing that. I played Dick Schiefelbusch for a little bitty time when he asked me to do something, and it was fun. I mean, the fun of doing something for other people, not because it's your agenda, but because it's a good thing to do. It's not because it's going to further your name in research, but it's because it's a good thing to do. It's a great liberating experience and great fun. And I don't do very much of that. Of course, it's always my agenda. Okay, so there is applied behavior now. I mean, it's the thing that evolved that we put into the array called the whole arena of applied behavior analysis, which isn't as smart as it used to be, but it's still there. So, but it's about field research. It's about the excitement of experimenting and doing things and finding things and learning things, and consolidating it and getting it and assembling it. We had another agenda. The other agenda was John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. When Mont and I were consulting with John Burchard at the Child Study and Treatment Center at the Fort Worden Juvenile Detention Center in Port Townsend, Washington, in November 22nd, 1963. Now, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it stunned us, it just stunned us to realize our hope. I mean, it was all so clear. We could do things. We could move the world. We could change our society. We could move things along. And we just had to work at it. But it was possible. We had the leaders with the vision. We could join something, and the excitement of that. Now, some of you with enough gray in your hair recognize and remember that. Okay, to remember that time of the excitement of doing things fast, doing things systematically, changing the way things were, because the way things were is not very good. That's the difference between a liberal and a conservative, is answering that question. The way things are not very good. And I'll remind you that they weren't very good in the early 60s. I remind you that the country changed. You know, we were all in different ways fighting a battle or dealing with an issue called segregation. Cheryl and I just came back from Saudi Arabia, and she experienced segregation of the kind that was prominent all the time without even good-hearted people being aware of it or acknowledging it. We began to think about segregation and poverty and the condensation and the lack of opportunity. And Martin Luther King was all of us, was the stator of that, was the person who brought that vision. And so another reason we came was for that. That was a reason for being here, not being someplace else working on other issues and problems. That was the reason. And I want to remind you again what it was that we saw, because it was so short. The best way to remind you is to remind you about the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. I don't know if you've seen it, go see it. Maya Lin, who did the Vietnam Wall Memorial, did that one. And it's a round table, granite table, you know, like 50 feet around, and with water flowing out and over and down the sides. And of course, there is the quote from Martin Luther King about justice will flow. And around the end of the table are Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, Topeka. Okay? And it went around to the events in the civil rights activity, the assassinations, the standing in the door, the major kind of events, and it was kind of well selected because it wasn't just any, it was a whole reminding you of the notable traumatic take-back event, and it ended with the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968, and we were in the middle of the Juniper Gardens project. You know, we were 4 years into it at that time. But I want to remind you of something else, that all of us working, all of us making an effort, that we changed this country in 14 years. That event was the event that disgusted everybody. It was the tipping point. Say, no more. No more, let's hear about, not yet, too soon, not yet, go slow. That event of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., who was all of our leader, a leader to all of us, was the tipping point. It ended that it was no longer, there wasn't any issues beyond that. I mean, it was all just playing it out, carrying it out. The majority of this country shifted to the tipping point. And it's a marvelous thing that we didn't do all the things we thought we were going to do with children, with employment, with things that we thought we were going to do quickly. It's taking us a lot longer. But the point being is that we were all a participant in an effort that was even larger than Dick's vision. Few are, but in a sense, the notion of changing this country, and there were so many people working. There was the neighborhood action groups. There was all these concordant activities that were going on that moved things. It wasn't just the event of the assassination, but the movement that had happened, the job training, the skills, the evolution and outcomes and roles for people of color with talent to move into Uriel Owens and John Burris, you know, the positions of things to do. And we were doing this all across the country. And that was the second reason we came, or the third reason. So, in a sense, we you know, the collection of, we all have our own reasons for things. And so, Dick's reason was about Kansas and about the goodness of things. He brought people, and you know, people that we didn't particularly agree with in terms of things. You know, Ross Copeland and Fred Gerardo, he brought them along. They came to help. They changed their lives, they changed their activities, and came to help to do this idea, this notion. We changed, and we came to risky situations, to risky places. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, but we were there. We were sort of there, and we had no answers. We had no methodologies except how you work with kids. We didn't know how to work with neighborhoods or communities and so on. And the first thing that was clear is that we needed somebody much more skillful than I was, and to get Vance Hall in place, so that the problems that I was creating would be somebody else doing it the other way, sort of like, you know, solving things rather than creating them, and so on. So the notion of the enterprise, and the enterprise is one that, remember, had many branches. Beyond it, there was the Living Environments group, where we took a group of my people after Betty left for a sabbatical to work with Dave, and sort of I had to figure out, well, what is it that, and I began working with other daycare centers and preschools out in the neighborhood, in the city outside of just the one in Juniper Gardens, in terms of examining things about what it is that people did. And the question was, Betty didn't do it that way. They're doing it that way. That's kind of silly. Well, let me do a study showing how much Betty's way was better. And so that built the Living Environments group. We did the Community Controlled Sanctions Project, working with the Public Housing Project, working with the Tenants Association, the safety issues, the recreation issues. We had the recreation programs and so on. We had parent cooperative preschool, where parents came in with their children and so on. We did a variety of things that, in a sense, the branches kept going. But we were there in the community for those three reasons, for four reasons actually. For Dick Schiefelbusch's vision, for our own convictions and our country's convictions and others like us about John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. following a vision. We were there because of the notion of the experimenting society and applied behavior analysis and learning to do, getting better at doing things and learning from it in a cumulative endeavor. But it's been a remarkable run, and it's not over yet.